Hey there, and welcome back to PHP Fundamentals. I am your host, Jeffrey Way, and for this lesson, we're going to be digging into arrays. What are they? How can we use them? Why would we use them? But before we do that, let's take care of just a little bit of organization. So if I switch back to my desktop, you'll remember that we created this alias that goes to our Apache htdocs folder. And that's fine. Right now it's empty. I've deleted the file from the previous lesson. But we want to create a sandbox because especially for the first couple of years, you're going to be learning a lot. And with that much learning comes a lot of leakage. So you want to create a sandbox folder where you can experiment, learn how to use things, and then you'll always have that reference. So if in the future you forget maybe how to connect to a database, well, you have a sandbox file that will show you how to do it. So within this folder, I'm going to create a new folder called Sandbox, and within it, we will get started with today's lesson, which is on arrays. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drag that into Sublime Text 2. And of course, I'll go ahead and create an index.php file. All right, so we're all set to go. I'm going to go ahead and paste in some HTML, because remember, just because it has a PHP extension doesn't mean you can't have HTML. We'll say arrays and h1 arrays. And that looks good, so let's go ahead and view it in the browser. If I come back, you'll see that I still have Mant running. We'll go to Open Start Page, and we'll go into the Sandbox folder, into Arrays, and we'll load that index.php file. Okay, now we are ready to get started, so I will switch into Enter Distraction-Free mode. So let's begin by taking a look at how we can create the simplest array. Go ahead and add a doc type here, and at the top, we'll enter our PHP. I want you to note that already we're beginning to embrace this idea of separating our PHP as much as possible from the HTML. In the previous lesson, we were creating variables everywhere in our HTML, but as you can imagine with larger projects, that quickly turns into something that doesn't scale well. So we're not going to go too far just yet. It's only the first few lessons, but I want you to be thinking about how you can separate your PHP from your output as much as possible. And the first step will simply be, let's place the PHP at the top. And then we'll take another step in a future chapter, and then another step when you begin learning about MVC. But for now, at the top of the page is fine. Now here, we know how to create a variable at this point. Month equals, and we'll do March. Now, in this case, we have created a string, March, and made the variable month equal to that string. But what if we actually want to have values for every month? Well, we could do something like this, but that's really bad. And you can imagine you would have to do this for each one. So not only is this getting away from the idea of a variable because we're making the variable name equal to the string, but also you can imagine for 12 months, well, that means you're going to have 12 variables, and that's not very flexible. What we can do instead is take advantage of an array. So watch if we delete this and we instead create an array, and I'm going to call it months. We'll begin with the basic syntax. Notice I write array and then opening parentheses and close parentheses. And within here, we can enter a comma-separated list of strings. So we'll begin with January, and I'm not going to do all of them, but we'll do March, April, all the way up to May. So now what we've done is we've created a variable called months, and that is equal to an array of 5 items. So how can we see this on the page? Well, there's actually a lot of different ways. One of the most basic ways is to use what we call var dump, V-A-R dump. And we're going to do a variable dump on months. All right, let's come back, reload the page, and now you can see this is what was spit out. Now, if that is not readable to you, I'll give you a little trick. You can either wrap var dump within pre-tags, or you can simply view the source, and that will make it a little bit more readable. So what we can see here is the months variable is an array with 5 items. And here's each of the items. So the first one is a string, and it's 7 characters long, and it's equal to January. The second one is 8 characters, and that's equal to February, and so forth. Now here's one of the most important things I want you to note, though. The very first item in this array actually has an index of 0. We start with 0. So that means if you actually wanted to echo out the value of the 5th item within the array, you would actually echo out the 4th index. Let me make that a little bit more clear. I'll delete our var dump, and I'm going to echo months, but that's not going to work on its own because we're dealing with an array. So that would simply echo out the word array. Not very helpful. Because we're dealing with array, we're instead going to reference the index. So remember when I mentioned echoing out the 5th item? Well, because it's 0 based, we're going to echo out 4, and that means 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so let's save that, reload the page, and now we are getting May. Reload that, there you go. So of course, if you want to echo out the first one, you would change that to 0, and that will reference the very first key. Reload the page, and now we get January. So now you can see that this is an easy way for one variable to contain a group of related information. Here's another example. Think of some of the Envato Tuts Plus sites. So we could say Tuts sites. Notice I'm using an underscore to separate words. And this is a convention. It's different really for every language you'll find. With JavaScript, you have camel casing, and that's where you would do Tuts sites. The first letter of each new word is capital. Now, PHP tends to favor underscores. And maybe even HTML, you would use dashes. So it can be different depending upon the language. But what's most important is that you're actually following these guidelines. It's a best practice to use underscore in PHP, so do that. Similarly, in JavaScript, it's a best practice to use camel casing, so use camel casing in JavaScript. All right, so let's go back and we're going to create an array. And again, I'm not going to do all of them because there's too many at this point, but we will reference maybe the 3 that I visit the most, Web Design Tuts and WordPress Tuts, 4 that I visit the most. So now we have a variable called Tuts Sites, and now we have a group of related content that's stored within it. Last time we used var dump, but this time I'll show you another way. We can use print r, and I'll go ahead and add that variable within there. So now if I reload the page, we're getting the same thing. Sometimes print r can be a little bit more readable. Var dump is going to give you a lot more information about it, but if you simply want to see what is there, so to speak, sometimes print r is the easiest choice. And now we can see, all right, we have an array with 4 items in it. Again, remember, the first one is 0. This trips up a lot of beginners, so I want to force that into your brain. So if I come back, I want you to remember, if you're echoing out simple strings, just use the echo keyword. If you're dealing with objects, which you'll learn about shortly, or arrays, either use var dump or instead use print r as we've done here. And again, remember that trick where you view the source. On my Mac, I'm using Command Option U, and that'll give you a bit more of a readable example, or again, wrap it within pre-tags. All right, so at this point though, we've only just echoed information onto the page. How could we actually work with this? Well, we now have a variable called Tuts Sites, and that's equal to an array of information. So now, why don't we say at the top, Tuts plus sites, and now we're going to display that on the page. So let's add an unordered list. And I'm going to open up PHP, and we're going to take a look at a loop. Now, we have an upcoming lesson dedicated to loops, but I'll give you a quick teaser here. And we're going to use a new keyword, for each. And we'll say for each Tuts sites. So this is fairly readable, actually. We're saying for each item within this Tuts sites array, well, how do we want to refer to each one of those? We'll say for each one as site. So what this is going to do, and I need to make sure I close out PHP, is it's going to filter through this array right here. And we're saying for each item within this array, assign its value to a variable called site. All right? So at this point, we could simply echo out site, and let's see what we get. And now we get all of the sites in a line. But we actually want those within list items, of course. Right now, we're just placing that long string within the unordered list. So let's do this now. Echo out a list item. We're going to nest the variable within the list item, and we know that we can nest variables within strings as long as we are using double quotes, not single quotes. All right, so now if I reload the page, we get this unordered list of sites. And what's nice about this is if I need to add another one, perhaps we'll use mobile tuts. Reload the page, now that's immediately been reflected. And this is something that you'll learn with PHP can really help. I'll go ahead and hide my sidebar. So you could imagine a form with maybe a select tag, and that dropdown will contain a list of days in the month, maybe 31. Well, you could create that select tag and manually create every single day, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you could store that information within an array and then simply echo out one list item, but you're looping through the items in that array. So you're actually running the echo command 30 or 31 times. So now that you have a basic understanding of arrays, I want to show you some other ways that we can use them. So in this case, we have used the standard syntax where you type array and within parentheses you add your keys. But as of PHP 5.4, we can actually change this a bit. I'll comment this out and we can accomplish the same thing. Rather than typing array like this, we can simply use brackets. I will just go ahead and yank what's inside the parentheses and paste that in. There we go. So now we have the exact same thing. But if I come back and I reload the page, we're going to get a parse error, and it's saying it unexpected that. And that's because, remember, on the MAMP version that we're using, that's actually PHP 5.3. So if we want to test this in 5.4, we can do this from the terminal. So let's go into CD Applications, MAMP, into the htdocs folder, and we'll go into Sandbox and Arrays. So now we have that index.php file. So remember, the default system PHP I have is 5.4.3. So if we want to run that file without viewing it in the browser, I can actually do this, php index.php. And that's going to run that PHP and echo out the results. So now we can see there were no errors and it did display those 5 list items. Good. So let's come back to our editor, and you might be thinking, well, I'm just going to use this bracket notation from now on. And whether you choose that or not depends on a couple things. One, will you have control over the server? So that means if you have the ability to use a host that has PHP 5.4 enabled, absolutely use it. It's a much cleaner syntax. For me, as someone who codes in JavaScript a lot, it's very welcomed because it's the same syntax. However, on the other hand, if maybe you're working on a team or you're creating a project for a client where you know the host is PHP 5.3 or lower, you want to be careful about using these modern features because it may not work as we experienced right here. So in those cases, you may want to stick with the more traditional syntax, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. So to give you an example, when I'm working on open source projects or I'm contributing to something, I will play it safe and use this syntax. On the other hand, when I'm building projects on my own, little personal projects, I will use the 5.4 syntax. So you can decide what is best for the project you're working on. I'm going to comment both of these out, and now we're going to take a look at associative arrays. So what we've done here is we have this array, but wouldn't it be nice if we could connect the name of the touch site to its URL? And we can do that with an associative array. Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can almost think of associative arrays as objects. I'll give you an example. Touch sites equals array. We'll use that traditional syntax. But now, rather than having each of the keys, we're going to have a key followed by this arrow, and then the value that is associated with that key. So in this case, we'll do net.touchplus.com. All right, so let's yank that just a few times, and I'll change this to PSD Touch. And then we'll do one more for WP Touch. And if you're working along in Sublime Text, I'll show you a quick little tip. If you select the letters that we're changing, in this case, we're changing net, I can select that and then on the Mac hit Command D. That's going to select the next occurrence of that sequence. And then I can change it to WP. And now I have multiple cursors, and I'm updating that in both of those places. If you need to do more, of course, you can hit Command D an infinite number of times to keep selecting. Okay, so let's save that. Now we have an associative array. Now, if we filter through these, so let's see what happens. Reload the page, and now we're only getting the URL, but what we still want is the name of the site. I'm going to put all of this on its own line, and then we'll comment it out. And we'll do another one. Now we're going to do for each touch sites as, but now rather than doing a single value, we can say as key value. So we could say name URL. And we can name those anything we want. So I could say site and the URL to path. It doesn't matter. These are variables that we are creating on our own. So all we're saying is filter through this array for each item. How are we going to refer to the name of the site? Well, we will call it name. Okay, well, how are we going to refer to the URL? Well, let's do URL. And that's it. So now we can do the exact same thing. We'll echo out a list item and the name. I'll save that, reload the page. Now we're back to that. Now we should also try to link to the site. That's the whole point of having the URL, right? Sure. Well, let's add that in right now. We'll add an anchor tag, like so. And now the href is going to be URL. So let's save that. I will reload the page, and it looks like I made a mistake. Unexpected t variable on line 27. And clearly what we can see here is I accidentally did double quotes again. So if we're surrounding our string with double quotes, as we've done right here, we can't just keep using them. We either have to change these to single, which will work, reload the page, that works, or alternatively, we can escape them by preceding them with a backslash. One more time, and that will work as well. But now we've created an array, we filtered through that and populated some HTML. And I can open up PSD-Tuts, or we can open up NetTuts, and it's working exactly as we would hope. The final little tip that I'll show you is, if we come back, it looks like I did not do any capitalization. So we could update these, of course, in each location like that, but that's no fun. I'm going to show you one of PHP's many functions that are available. So right here, if we want to run the name variable through a function, we're going to close out our string and we're going to concatenate. And remember, I noted that we concatenate with the period. So we're going to echo out this string and then we're going to concatenate, and we're going to use a PHP built-in function called UCWords. So now we're going to echo that out, and now we just have the rest of that HTML fragment to add on, so we will concatenate that as well. Now if I reload the page, you'll see that UCWords will capitalize the first letter of every word in the string that it is provided. And the final thing is, I don't see any plus here, and it should be NetTuts plus. Well, if you want, you could add for each one, you could add it right there. We'll come back, reload the page, and now it's working as we would hope. So now you're starting to see the control that you have with PHP. If something is not provided, maybe it needs to be formatted in a specific way, PHP can do all of this for you. The key, though, is that you want to make it as readable as possible. So in this case, I don't see any real need to escape the quotations. Let's just use single quotes. That's perfectly fine, and it makes for a slightly more readable string. And of course, an alternative way we could write this would be to do, paste that in, and then we close out PHP, and then I'm going to run n for each. I'll explain all of this shortly. Then we add our list item like normal. We'll have our anchor tag, and then we can add PHP blocks here. So we could do PHP echo name and PHP echo URL. And because we're using the shorthand, I can get rid of the curly brace. So let's save that. And if I come back, reload the page, we're getting the exact same thing. This is simply a different way to display it. Now we are adding our for each. We're using this shorthand syntax, which I will go over more in the loops lesson. We're closing out PHP. Then we're echoing out just our regular list item, and then we open up PHP as needed. Finally, we have to specify that we're done with this for each. We have to tell PHP when we're done looping, so we use this end for each syntax. And the final improvement we can make, again, is if you are working in PHP 5.4 and you have that luxury, you can change this out. Rather than doing echo, you can change it out like here, because the echo short tag syntax will always be enabled in version PHP 5.4, regardless of what's said in the php.ini file. So yes, that was a mouthful. Just accept that if you're working in PHP 5.4 and you have that luxury, that rather than doing PHP echo, you can just use this syntax right here, which is shorthand or short tags for an echo. That means echo and then whatever you pass, the name. Let's save that, reload the page, and we get the exact same effect. All right, so that's been your whirlwind tour on working with arrays. I hope you are working along. Save this file to your sandbox so that if you need to come back, you have this reference. My name's Jeffrey Way, and I'll see you later.